In a world where respect seems increasingly rare, sometimes the universe has a way of delivering perfect justice. When an elderly man walked into Foot Locker with his weathered hands clutching a faded newspaper clipping, he had no idea his simple purchase would turn into one of those moments that reminds us all about the danger of judging others. The young cashier behind the counter had worked there for 3 years, and in that time, he'd developed a habit of sizing up customers, deciding who was worth his attention and who wasn't. That day, his quick judgment would lead to a humiliation he never saw coming. Comment where you're watching from today, because this story has touched people from all corners of the world. The small shopping mall in Phoenix, Arizona, wasn't particularly busy that Tuesday afternoon. The air conditioning hummed steadily against the desert heat outside, creating a comfortable sanctuary for the scattered shoppers browsing through stores. The Foot Locker sat between a cell phone repair kiosk and a pretzel stand, its black and white striped decor instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever shopped for athletic footwear. Inside, the familiar smell of new shoes and synthetic materials filled the air. Bright fluorescent lights illuminated rows of sneakers displayed on the walls, each pair seemingly calling out to potential buyers with promises of improved performance, style, or status. Pop music played softly through overhead speakers, barely audible above the occasional conversations between customers and staff. Behind the counter stood Marcus, a 24-year-old assistant manager with slicked back hair and a perpetual smirk that seemed permanently etched onto his face. He wore his referee-striped uniform shirt with the top button undone and a gold chain visible at his neck. Small rebellions against corporate policy that he got away with because the store manager rarely visited. Marcus had developed a reputation among his coworkers for his selective customer service, charming and attentive to the young, fashionable shoppers who might boost the store's social media presence, dismissive and impatient with everyone else. The elderly man who pushed open the glass door moved slowly but deliberately. His weathered face carried deep lines around the eyes and mouth, not just the marks of age, but of a life fully lived. He wore a simple button-up shirt tucked neatly into pressed khaki pants that hung somewhat loosely on his thin frame. His shoes were practical, well-worn walking shoes that had clearly seen better days. What stood out most, however, was the careful way he carried himself. There was a quiet dignity in his posture, despite the slight stoop of his shoulders. In his hand, he clutched a newspaper clipping that had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had begun to tear. His eyes scanned the store with a mixture of determination and slight discomfort. This clearly wasn't a place he visited often. He hesitated just inside the entrance, momentarily overwhelmed by the wall of shoes and the thumping background music. Marcus noticed the old man immediately, but made no move to help him. Instead, he leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone and occasionally glancing up with thinly veiled impatience. 2 teenage boys entered the store, and Marcus immediately straightened, putting on his customer service smile. "What's up, guys? New Jordans just dropped yesterday. Want to check them out?" The boys nodded enthusiastically, and Marcus led them to a display animatedly describing the shoes' features, the limited quantities available, and how certain NBA stars had been spotted wearing them. Meanwhile, the elderly man made his way slowly around the store, looking at different basketball shoes with careful consideration. After helping the teenagers, who left without purchasing anything, Marcus returned to his position behind the counter. By then, the elderly man had selected a box from the wall and was examining the shoes inside with careful attention. They were high-end basketball shoes, not the latest model, but still premium priced. The old man approached the counter with the box in his hands, a small smile of satisfaction on his face. "I'd like to purchase these, please," he said, his voice carrying the slight rasp of age, but clear and polite. Marcus looked from the elderly man to the shoes and back again, making no attempt to hide his amusement. "These are basketball shoes, sir," he said, emphasizing the word basketball as if explaining something to a child. "High-performance athletic footwear for playing basketball." He glanced at the old man's thin frame and added with a smirk, "They're not really walking shoes for the mall." The elderly man's smile didn't waver. "Yes, I know what they are. I'd like to purchase them, please." A few other customers in the store had begun to notice the exchange, some frowning at Marcus's tone, others pretending not to listen, while stealing glances at the interaction. "They're pretty expensive," Marcus continued, making no move to ring up the purchase. "Almost $200. We have some, more appropriate options that might be better suited for someone like yourself." He gestured vaguely toward a section of the store that held basic walking shoes. The elderly man placed the shoebox firmly on the counter. "These are the ones I want." Marcus shrugged and began scanning the box, muttering just loud enough to be heard. "Not sure why you'd waste money on shoes you'll never use properly, but it's your cash to burn." The old man didn't respond, but reached into his pocket for his wallet. As he did so, the folded newspaper clipping he'd been carrying fell onto the counter. Marcus glanced at it, his eyes catching a glimpse of a younger version of the man before him, wearing a basketball uniform from decades past. "That you?" Marcus asked with undisguised skepticism, nodding toward the clipping while ringing up the purchase. "Yes, that's me," the man replied simply. Marcus let out a short laugh. "What, were you some kind of basketball star back in the prehistoric era?" Just as the words left Marcus's mouth, the store's door swung open. A massive figure filled the doorway, momentarily blocking the light from outside. Every head in the store turned, conversation stopping mid-sentence as a familiar face came into view, the unmistakable presence of Charles Barkley. The atmosphere in the Foot Locker shifted instantly as Charles Barkley's imposing figure moved through the doorway. At 6'6" and with the commanding presence that had made him a legend both on and off the court, Sir Charles didn't just enter rooms, he transformed them. Conversations halted mid-sentence, phones lowered, all eyes turned toward the NBA icon, whose personality had always been as outsized as his athletic abilities. Barkley was dressed casually in a polo shirt and jeans, a flash of an expensive watch on his wrist, catching the fluorescent lighting. Despite being years past his playing prime, he still carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone who had once dominated the hardwood of America's greatest arenas. His gaze swept over the store, taking in the displays, the customers, and the situation at the counter where Marcus stood frozen, his mouth slightly open in shock. Phoenix held a special place in Barkley's heart. Though he had played for several teams during his illustrious NBA career, his time with the Phoenix Suns had been particularly meaningful. He had led the team to the NBA Finals in 1993, earning the league's Most Valuable Player award that same year. Even decades later, he was still beloved in the city, recognized instantly wherever he went. The elderly man at the counter seemed to be the only person in the store not immediately affected by Barkley's entrance. He continued calmly counting out bills from his worn leather wallet, focused on completing his purchase rather than turning to stare at the celebrity who had just walked in. This quiet dignity stood in stark contrast to Marcus's suddenly nervous energy as the cashier realized a basketball legend might have overheard his dismissive comments. What nobody in the store yet realized was that the connection between Barkley and the elderly gentleman went far deeper than a chance encounter at a shoe store. Their paths had intersected decades earlier in a way that had profoundly influenced both their lives, though in vastly different ways. The elderly man was William Coach Bill Tompkins, though it had been many years since anyone had called him by that title. In the 1960s and early 70s, he had been one of the most respected high school basketball coaches in Philadelphia, working at a time when racial integration in sports was still meeting fierce resistance in many parts of the country. His teams had won 3 state championships, but more importantly, he had mentored hundreds of young men, teaching them not just basketball skills, but life lessons about perseverance, discipline, and integrity. The newspaper clipping that had fallen onto the counter was from 1971, showing a much younger Coach Bill surrounded by his championship team. Though he had never made it to the NBA himself, having his promising college career cut short by a knee injury, he had channeled his passion for the game into coaching. He had developed a reputation for identifying talent in players that others overlooked and helping them reach their full potential, both athletically and personally. After retiring from coaching, Bill had lived a quiet life, occasionally following the careers of his former players who had gone on to play at higher levels. He had never sought recognition for his contributions to the game, content in knowing he had made a difference in the lives of the young men he had coached. The basketball shoes he was purchasing today weren't for himself. They were a birthday gift for his 16-year-old grandson, who had recently made his high school varsity team and who idolized Charles Barkley, despite the legend having retired before he was born. As for Marcus, his journey to becoming the dismissive cashier at Foot Locker had been paved with dashed hopes and bitter disappointments. Growing up, he had dreamed of basketball glory himself. He had been a decent player in high school, good enough to start on his team, but never quite good enough to attract serious attention from college scouts. After graduation, he had drifted from one retail job to another, eventually landing at Foot Locker, where he had stayed longer than anywhere else, gradually working his way up to assistant manager. His basketball dreams had faded, replaced by a growing resentment toward those who had achieved what he couldn't. He had developed a habit of building himself up by putting others down, particularly older customers whom he viewed as easy targets. The respect he couldn't earn on the court or in life, he tried to command from behind the counter, using the small authority his position gave him to make himself feel important. The other customers in the store represented a cross-section of Phoenix's diverse community. A mother and her 10-year-old daughter were shopping for shoes for the girls' first season of youth basketball. An older teenager who played for his high school team was examining the latest releases with the serious concentration of a connoisseur. A middle-aged man was looking for comfortable athletic shoes for his morning walks. All of them had temporarily abandoned their shopping to watch the unfolding scene at the counter. The store itself was laid out like most Foot Locker locations, shoes displayed on wall racks with the newest and most expensive models at eye level. Basketball shoes dominated the selection, reflecting both the sport's popularity and the higher profit margins these premium products commanded. Posters of current NBA stars covered the walls, their larger-than-life images looking down on customers as if bestowing their blessing on the purchases below. In one corner, a television mounted on the wall played highlight reels of the previous night's NBA games on a continuous loop. Coincidentally, a segment about the Phoenix Suns' glory days had just begun, showing clips of Charles Barkley in his prime, driving to the basket, pulling down rebounds, and delivering his famously quotable post-game interviews. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, as if the universe itself was setting the stage for what was about to unfold. The sound of the cash register beeping broke the momentary spell cast by Barkley's entrance. Marcus reluctantly turned his attention back to Coach Bill's purchase, though his eyes kept darting toward the basketball legend, now browsing casually through a nearby display. Without the confident smirk he had worn earlier, Marcus looked younger, more vulnerable, a young man suddenly aware that his behavior might be observed and judged by someone he actually respected. "Your receipt, sir," Marcus said, his voice noticeably more courteous than before as he handed the slip of paper to Coach Bill. His eyes nervously flickered between the elderly man and Barkley, who was now gradually making his way toward the counter, seemingly just another customer, but undeniably the center of gravity in the room. What Marcus didn't know, what no one in the store yet knew, was that this chance encounter was about to expose connections that spanned generations, revealing how our actions toward others, both kind and cruel, can circle back to us in unexpected ways. As Charles Barkley approached, the small drama that had been playing out at the counter was about to transform into something none of them would soon forget. Coach Bill carefully placed his receipt in his wallet alongside the newspaper clipping, which he had retrieved from the counter. He was about to pick up the shoebox when Marcus leaned forward, his previous nervousness giving way to a renewed attempt at asserting his authority. Perhaps it was the pressure of having a celebrity in the store, or maybe it was the need to redeem himself in front of the other customers, but Marcus seemed determined to have the last word. "You know, I still don't get why someone like you is spending this kind of money on professional basketball shoes," Marcus said, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "I mean, no offense, but you're not exactly going to be dunking anytime soon, are you?" His laugh was forced, his eyes darting toward Charles Barkley to see if the NBA legend was appreciating his banter. Coach Bill regarded Marcus with the patient expression of a man who had taught teenagers for decades. "Sometimes the things we buy aren't just for ourselves," he replied calmly. "Sometimes they're meant to inspire others." Marcus scoffed. "Yeah, well, whoever you're buying these for should know that shoes don't make the player. I mean, I had all the gear back in high school, and look where it got me." There was a bitter edge to his voice, a glimpse of the disappointment that fueled his attitude. Perhaps it wasn't the gear that was the problem, Coach Bill observed quietly, not unkindly. He reached for the shoebox again, but Marcus hadn't finished. Let me guess, these are for your grandson or something? You think buying him expensive shoes is going to turn him into the next LeBron? Marcus's tone had grown more challenging, his words carrying the weight of his own failed dreams. Kids today think all they need is the right brand, the right look. They don't understand what it really takes. A few of the customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The mother pulled her daughter closer, whispering something in her ear. The teenage basketball player had stopped browsing and was openly watching the interaction, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and anger on Coach Bill's behalf. Charles Barkley had paused his browsing as well, standing near a display of socks, his head tilted slightly as he listened to the exchange. His expression remained neutral, but there was an intensity to his gaze as it shifted between Marcus and Coach Bill. You're right about one thing, Coach Bill said, still maintaining his composure. Success takes more than the right shoes. It takes discipline, perseverance, and character. He looked directly at Marcus. It also takes respect, for yourself and for others, regardless of their age or appearance. Marcus rolled his eyes. Yeah, okay, Grandpa, whatever you say. He pushed the shoebox toward Coach Bill with unnecessary force. Enjoy your purchase. Hope whoever gets these appreciates how much they cost you. The elderly man accepted the box without comment, his dignity intact, despite Marcus's attempts to belittle him. As he turned to leave, the newspaper clipping slipped from his wallet again, floating to the floor this time. A customer bent to retrieve it, glancing at the yellowed paper before handing it back. This is you? The customer asked, genuine interest in his voice. You coached basketball? Before Coach Bill could answer, Marcus interjected from behind the counter. Probably some small-town high school team nobody's ever heard of, back when they still used peach baskets instead of hoops, right? He snickered at his own joke. The customer ignored Marcus, his attention on the clipping. Wait, this says Philadelphia Central, 1971 state champions. That was a legendary team. Coach Bill smiled modestly. We had some talented young men that year. Marcus leaned over the counter, his skepticism evident. Let me see that. He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Coach Bill passed him the clipping. Marcus studied the faded newspaper photo, his expression shifting from doubt to confusion. This says Coach William Tompkins led Philadelphia Central to their third consecutive state championship. He looked up at Coach Bill. So you're saying you're this Coach Tompkins guy? The one who supposedly developed all those college players back in the day? I was fortunate to work with many gifted athletes, Coach Bill acknowledged. Marcus's disbelief was palpable. Right, and I'm sure you're going to tell me you coached some famous NBA players too, huh? His sarcasm was thick, his posture challenging as he handed back the clipping. Coach Bill tucked the paper carefully into his wallet. Fame isn't everything, young man. What matters is the impact we have on others, whether anyone knows about it or not. Marcus wasn't satisfied. No, don't get all philosophical on me. If you were such a big-shot coach, name one player you coached who made it to the pros. Just one. He folded his arms across his chest, confident he had caught the old man in an exaggeration. The store had grown completely silent. Even the pop music playing through the speakers seemed to have faded into the background. Everyone was watching the interaction now, uncomfortable with Marcus's behavior, but curious about Coach Bill's response. Coach Bill hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but seemingly out of modesty. I've coached many young men who went on to live successful lives. Some played college ball, a few made it to professional leagues, but that's not... Names, Marcus interrupted. Give me names. Anyone I would have heard of? His voice had taken on an edge of cruelty, the kind that comes from someone trying to publicly humiliate another person. The teenage basketball player stepped forward. Dude, leave him alone. What's your problem? Marcus shot him a warning look. This is between me and Grandpa here. I'm just asking him to back up his story. He turned back to Coach Bill. So, any names we'd recognize, Coach? The way he said Coach made it clear he didn't believe the title was deserved. Coach Bill sighed, looking down at the shoebox in his hands. I never sought recognition for myself through my players' achievements. That wasn't why I coached. That's what I thought, Marcus said with smug satisfaction. Just another old guy living in the past, making up stories about glory days that never happened. It was at this moment that Charles Barkley finally approached the counter. His voice, instantly recognizable with its deep, distinctive tone, cut through the tension like a thunderclap. Actually, Barkley said, drawing all eyes in the store to his imposing figure, Coach Bill isn't making anything up. Marcus froze, the color draining from his face as he realized Charles Barkley was now standing directly in front of his counter, looking more imposing in person than he ever had on television. And how would you know? Marcus asked, his voice suddenly much smaller than it had been moments before. Charles Barkley placed a hand on Coach Bill's shoulder, a gesture of both respect and familiarity. His eyes, however, remained fixed on Marcus with an intensity that had once intimidated the greatest players in the NBA. Because, Barkley said, before I was Sir Charles, before I was the round mound of rebound, before I was an NBA MVP or an Olympic gold medalist, I was just Charles, a skinny kid from Leeds, Alabama, who was lucky enough to attend Coach Bill Tompkins's summer basketball camp in Philadelphia. The atmosphere in the Foot Locker shifted dramatically. Every person in the store stood motionless, processing Charles Barkley's revelation. Marcus gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white as the implications of what was happening began to sink in. He had spent the last 15 minutes mocking a man who, as it turned out, had played a role in shaping one of basketball's greatest legends. Coach Bill's summer camp changed my perspective on basketball, Barkley continued, his voice carrying the weight of genuine respect. I was 14 years old, all arms and legs, with more attitude than skill. Most coaches saw me as a problem. Coach Bill saw potential. Coach Bill's expression softened with recognition, the years falling away as he looked more closely at Barkley. Charles? Little Charles from Alabama? Good heavens, I wouldn't have recognized you. Barkley laughed, that familiar booming sound that had punctuated countless interviews and broadcasts over the decades. Well, I ain't so little anymore, Coach. The two men embraced, a genuine moment between a mentor and former student reunited after many years. The other customers watched in amazement, witnesses to an unexpected reunion that spanned generations of basketball history. I remember you, Coach Bill said, shaking his head in wonder, always asking questions, always wanting to know why we did things a certain way, never satisfied with just being told what to do. That part hasn't changed much, Barkley admitted with a grin. Got me in trouble more than once. Marcus stood behind the counter, his former bravado completely evaporated. He looked as if he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. The teenage basketball player who had earlier defended Coach Bill was now recording the interaction on his phone, his eyes wide with excitement. Barkley turned his attention to Marcus, who visibly flinched under the basketball legend's gaze. But instead of the anger or condemnation Marcus clearly expected, Barkley's expression held something more complex. Disappointment mixed with understanding. You know, Barkley said, addressing Marcus directly, I used to be a lot like you. Thought I knew everything. Thought respect was something other people owed me, not something I had to earn. He gestured toward Coach Bill. This man taught me different. Coach Bill raised a hand modestly. Charles was always a quick learner when he wanted to be. Not quick enough, Barkley countered. Took me years to really understand what Coach was trying to teach us. Wasn't just about basketball, it was about life. He focused again on Marcus, about not judging people before you know their story. The mother who had been shopping with her daughter stepped forward. Excuse me, Coach Tompkins. My father used to talk about your teams. He said you were ahead of your time with how you developed players. Coach Bill smiled gratefully at her. That's very kind. I just tried to see the whole person, not just the athlete. That's exactly what my father said, the woman replied. He played for Central's rival school, but he always respected your program. As more customers began to recognize the significance of who Coach Bill was, Marcus sank further into embarrassment. He busied himself straightening items behind the counter, clearly wishing he could disappear. Barkley wasn't finished, however. You know what Coach Bill used to tell us? The way you do anything is the way you do everything. That stuck with me. He looked pointedly at Marcus. The way you treat people who can't do anything for you says everything about your character. Marcus finally found his voice, though it emerged as little more than a mumble. I didn't know. I never would have. That's the point, Barkley interrupted. You never know who someone is or what they've accomplished just by looking at them. He gestured around the store. You think your job is selling shoes? It's not. It's about treating people with dignity. Everyone who walks through that door deserves your respect. Coach Bill placed a gentle hand on Barkley's arm. Charles, it's all right. The young man made a mistake. We all do. You're still defending the difficult ones, Coach, Barkley said with a shake of his head. Some things never change. The teenage basketball player had moved closer, unable to contain his excitement. Coach Tompkins, did you really coach Charles Barkley? Like, for real? Not officially, Coach Bill clarified. Charles attended my summer camp for 2 years. I was just one of many coaches who had the privilege of working with him during his formative years. Always modest, Barkley said. The truth is, Coach Bill was the first person who told me I could make it to the NBA if I was willing to put in the work. He looked at the teenager. You play? The boy nodded eagerly. Point guard for East Valley High. I'm hoping to play in college. Barkley nodded toward Coach Bill. Then you should listen to what this man has to say. I guarantee he knows more about basketball fundamentals than half the coaches in the NBA. Coach Bill chuckled. Now, who's exaggerating? A small crowd had gathered around them now, drawn by the presence of Charles Barkley, but increasingly fascinated by Coach Bill's story. Phones were out, recording the interaction. Marcus watched from behind the counter, the full weight of his misjudgment evident in his slumped shoulders. Barkley noticed the shoebox Coach Bill was still holding. New kicks, Coach? You taking up basketball again in your retirement? Coach Bill smiled. They're for my grandson. His birthday is next week. He made varsity as a sophomore. Following in your footsteps, Barkley observed. He's a good boy, works hard, listens well. Coach Bill paused. He's actually a big fan of yours. Has posters of you in his room, even though you retired before he was born. Barkley's face lit up. Is that right? Well, we can't have him just getting shoes then. He turned to Marcus. You got a pen and paper back there? Marcus scrambled to find a notepad and pen, nearly knocking over a display in his haste. He handed them to Barkley with trembling hands. As Barkley scribbled a note and signed his name with a flourish, Coach Bill addressed Marcus directly for the first time since the confrontation began. Young man, we all make mistakes. The measure of a person isn't in never falling, but in how they rise after they fall. Marcus nodded, unable to meet Coach Bill's eyes. I'm sorry, sir. I was way out of line. You were, Coach Bill agreed calmly, but tomorrow is a new day, a chance to do better. Barkley finished his note and handed it to Coach Bill, along with something else, one of his business cards. Tell your grandson I said congratulations, and have him give me a call. Maybe I can come see him play sometime. The store erupted in excited murmurs. Marcus finally looked up, his face a mixture of shame and awe. Sir, he said, addressing Coach Bill, your purchase today is on the house. It's the least I can do. Coach Bill shook his head. No, son. I'll pay for what I came to buy, but I would appreciate it if you'd ring up Mr. Barkley with the same courtesy you'd show to anyone who walks through that door. Barkley laughed and clapped Coach Bill on the shoulder. Still teaching life lessons, Coach. Some things never change. As Barkley picked out a pair of shoes for himself, Coach Bill prepared to leave. The other customers made way for him, several stopping to shake his hand. The mother, who had recognized his name, asked if he would take a picture with her daughter, explaining that the girl was just starting to play basketball herself. Marcus watched this procession from behind the counter, a valuable lesson unfolding before his eyes. In the span of 30 minutes, his entire perspective had been challenged. He had mocked a man whose quiet influence had helped shape not just Charles Barkley, but generations of young athletes who never forgot the lessons they learned under his guidance. As Coach Bill finally made his way to the door, Barkley called after him. Hey, Coach, one more thing. That saying you always used to tell us, what was it again? Coach Bill turned, a twinkle in his eyes. Character is revealed in how you treat those who can do nothing for you. Barkley nodded, then looked pointedly at Marcus. Remember that, young man. It might be the most valuable thing you learn selling shoes. Stories like this remind us that respect isn't something that should be earned. It's something everyone deserves from the moment they walk through the door. We never truly know who someone is, what wisdom they carry, or how they've shaped the lives of others. Coach Bill didn't need Charles Barkley to validate his worth, but his encounter with Marcus teaches us all an important lesson about judgment and humility. Have you ever misjudged someone and later regretted it? Or perhaps you've been on the receiving end of unfair treatment? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might just inspire someone else to think twice before making assumptions. If this video touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps our channel reach more people with these powerful messages. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that might change your perspective. Remember, true character isn't revealed in how we treat those who can benefit us, but in how we treat those who can't. So the next time you interact with a stranger, ask yourself, how would I want to be treated if our roles were reversed? Thanks for watching today. From wherever you're joining us around the world, we appreciate you being part of our community. Until next time, treat others with kindness. You never know when you might be serving a legend in disguise.